is unwilling to pull this trigger. So I think that's in a way what the Wall Street is saying about Donald Trump. Trump always chickens out. Probably can be applied here. I think he's scared to go for it against Vladimir Putin.
Back to the events in the Oval Office, the comments, the remarks, in many ways remarkable remarks of Donald Trump, President Trump, talking about Ukraine. The president gave a glimpse into the conversation he'd had on the phone yesterday with Vladimir Putin.
That's a bloodbath that's going on over there. And when I see the moment where I say, well, they're going to just keep fighting. You know, I gave the analogy yesterday when I spoke to President Putin. I had a 2-hour and 15-minute call with him. Sometimes, and this is me speaking maybe in a negative sense, but sometimes you see two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park. And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot because both sides are suffering before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart. But it's a pretty known analogy. You have two kids, they fight. Sometimes you let them fight for a little while. You see it in hockey. You see it in sports. The referees let them go for a couple of seconds, let them go for a little while before you pull them apart. And maybe, and I said it, and maybe that's a negative because we're saying go, but a lot of bad blood. There's some bad blood between the two. I have to deal with it, and the chancellor has to deal with it. It's incredible. The level of, there's a great hatred between those two men, but between the warring parties, great hatred.
So, President Trump speaking just a few moments ago. Fabrice Pothier, the former Director of Policy Planning at Nato, is on the line. Welcome to you, Fabrice.
Good evening.
What were your thoughts on what you heard there from the Oval Office?
Well, first, I think the prospect of Donald Trump being a sort of kindergarten teacher is a pretty scary one, given how he handles both himself and world affairs. But that's the world we are in. Second, obviously, what is deeply disturbing, and we saw that in his message a few days ago, is that he draws this kind of equidistance between Ukraine and Russia. He equates what Ukraine did over the weekend in terms of strikes against some of Vladimir Putin's war infrastructure. He equates that to what Russia has been doing by attacking Ukrainian civilians and cities. And obviously, this is both morally but also strategically wrong. And just to conclude here, I think the paradox is Trump is not giving himself the means to finish this. He claims he wants to finish it. He shows impatience. He's kind of right about that because this is a war that has cost in human lives and in resources huge amounts on both sides, but especially on the Ukrainian side, who has not asked for anything. And yet he's not giving himself the means because he's sitting on this sanction bill that has been drafted by Senator Lindsey Graham and that is ready to get the votes in the Senate and is unwilling to pull this trigger. So I think that's in a way what the Wall Street is saying about Donald Trump. Trump always chickens out, probably can be applied here. I think he's scared to go for it against Vladimir Putin, even though we all know that every time Donald Trump signals a change of tone, a change of posture vis-a-vis Putin, that Putin then start to give some concessions or start to be willing to play a more, I would say, sincere diplomatic negotiation. So I think the time is with him, not with President Zelensky or President Putin. It's with President Trump, but he's unwilling to define this time.
Yeah. I mean, if President Trump would be able to hear what you just said, Fabrice, I think we both know he would be absolutely furious. The use of that phrase, TACO, apparently in currency among Wall Street traders. TACO, an acronym for Trump always chickens out, is how you interpret what you've just been hearing from the president. And that statement of equidistance, if you like, on the part of the president between Russia and Ukraine. He did at one point explicitly, in his remarks in the Oval Office, speak about, well, coming down hard on both sides at some point after letting them carry on, fighting like children on a playground, coming down on both sides. Takes two to tango, is what he said. Look, I'm going to come in a moment to get your thoughts on sanctions, Fabrice, but I guess there will be a worry, and we touched on this a moment ago in my previous conversation, a worry that will we see America pull back further from support for Ukraine, even to the extent of denying Ukraine that vital intelligence that America can supply after the attacks on those Russian strategic bombers?
That's hard to say, and this decision obviously belongs to Donald Trump, and this is where Ukraine is vulnerable, because there's a huge dependency towards these American ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems and platforms that allow the Ukrainians to be able to defend themselves and prosecute and plan some attacks. So that's obviously the big Achilles heel of Ukraine right now. But I think it's important that the Europeans get their act together, and that's why it's important that Chancellor Merz was in Washington, because the Europeans have to start developing some alternatives to the US systems.
Yes.
It will not be as good as the US, but at least you do have some options on the table where the Ukrainians are not left with nothing in terms of space-based sensors, in terms of intel and data fusion in order to be doing targeting against Russian platforms. Yeah. So I think it's very important that the Europeans really accelerate and scale up, because they're talking about it, but frankly, I'm engaged in some of those discussions. It's not going fast and big enough. And we have the technology. It's a question of putting the money and the sense of urgency.
And Will, what we've just heard from President Trump, the idea of just openly saying he means to stand aside now and let the war go on, will that encourage Ukraine's friends in Europe to step up to the kind of degree that you say want to see? And the choice is now pretty stark.
Yes. And the paradox is that, again, in terms of space capabilities, we do have some assets, the United Kingdom and Europe as a whole. It's the question of putting them together, developing new AI-based systems to fuse a lot of the intel that you can gather through different platforms, so that the Ukrainians have what it takes to be able to defend themselves. And actually, this is not just an act of charity. If we get this right, we will have built the backbone of what basically should be European security and defense, which has been very reliant on the United States. And I think the conclusion we draw, including in London, is that we cannot have that level of dependence anymore. So actually, it's in our self-interest to get the Ukrainians the kind of system and the kind of ISR support they need, because it will serve us down the line.
Yeah, the choices do now seem to be not just stark, but inescapable. Fabrice Pothier, former Director of Planning at NATO, thank you so much.